Hello, I'm Saremy from So and today I'm going to show you how to attach Picot edging, which is an elastic, to the edge of knits. So we're going to use a serger and a cover stitch and a straight stitch machine today. So this is geared towards using a cover stitch and a serger. All right, so there's a few different styles of Picot. There's quite a few different styles of Picot edge, and you can see this is a pretty wide one here, very soft, more like a waistband type of trim. And then there's these really delicate little stretchy lace kinds. This one has miniature little pom-poms on the edges. This one's definitely a little lacier. And they usually are found in, lingerie and things like that. So we're going to put it on the edge of this fabric here, and then I'm going to show you at the end how to sew it in the round. So say you're doing it on a leg hole and you want to know how to do that last step to get it into the round of the leg. So, all right, so I'm just going to use this cross-cut cotton with some lycra or spandex in it. Just a simple fabric here, and I'm going to use this Picot edge that I have left over from a project. All right, I have my serger set to the neutral settings on the right hand side for the length and the differential, and as far as the width goes, I have it down to its narrowest width, and across my top I have the tensions around 3.5 to 4. It just depends on your fabric. Okay, so you need it down a pretty narrow setting because most of these Picots are pretty narrow. If you're doing something wide like that waistband one I showed you, you could probably have it at a wider width for the seam finish. So you're going to put your Picot right sides together, check to see if it has a right or wrong side, and you're going to put it right sides together, and you're going to sew this seam here. And I like to leave my presser foot down, but then I lift it up to kind of get it in there. And if you don't want to trim anything off because you don't want to nick the elastic, so we're just going to push this all the way up to the needles, go right past the blade, and you can even drop the blade on a lot of machines. I'll leave mine on since some machines don't have that feature. Mine does. It's pretty easy. I'm using the Juki MO1000. So, all right, so we're just going to gently pull our Picot. Let's get it going in there. All right, so now we have our machine holding it. We've got a few stitches in. Now, when you're stretching this, you want to stretch it, then sew, and hold it while it's stretched. Don't pull against your needles as you're sewing. You want to make it static and stay in one length. So we'll just gently pull this. You'll kind of get the hang of how much to pull. You don't really want to pull a whole lot. Usually when you're using this, you're using it on the edge of something that is usually close to the size you want it to be, and you're going to be amazed that just pulling this gently is going to do enough to kind of cinch it the way you want it. All right, so we've got this gently pulled right here, or gently, I pulled it here. And then I'll just pull my fabric to maintain it right along that edge there. You're going to just overlock along the edge here. Don't trim anything. You can. Don't sweat it if you do. It's going to be fine. Okay, now I'm going to reset here. Pull a little bit. Go all the way to the end here. I'm going to get that. And now I'm just going to be able to hold this whole thing and finish. In general, I don't pre-cut my Picot edge elastic. I just go to the end and then I cut it to fit. All right, so now we have our Picot edge there with the serger. My serger is pretty wide. I could probably get a little narrower if I've fiddled with the settings a lot. So now we're going to take this to our cover stitch machine. We're going to turn it to the inside. We're going to cover stitch. Now, if you don't have a cover stitch, you can use a zigzag stitch here. And I'm going to tell you a secret. You can use a straight stitch too. Because you've already stretched this and applied it, once you go to use it on your straight stitch machine, as long as you keep this stretched and hold it stretched and then stitch it with your straight stitch machine while it's stretched, once it bounces back, it's going to be fine. And you might see your stitches look a little bit loose, but the thing is, when it stretches, those stitches have a place to go and kind of relax, and then you're not going to pop any stitches. But if you don't have a cover stitch, I'd recommend using a zigzag. It's going to give you a little bit more purchase on the entire width of this turned back seam allowance, and it just looks a little bit nicer than the single needle straight stitch. So, all right, so now we're going to cover stitch this. All right, so our last step with stitching this picot edging on is to use the cover stitch machine. You can also use a zigzag machine. You can also use your straight stitch machine, like I said before. I'm just today focusing on using your cover stitch. So if you've already got your picot edging attached, you're going to slide it under here, and I'm using the Juki MCS 1500. I have all my tensions for the upper two needles at about neutral, and I have the differential set at neutral, but I have the length all the way to length 4. So, all right, so we're going to slide this under there. If you have this little tail, you can pull it and kind of get it under there. I usually use my awl to kind of poke it under there. If you have a tail of elastic, you can do that. So I like to get it right up to my needles and then set my presser foot down. And you're gonna wanna keep this fabric kind of taut. So make sure you're smoothing it and kind of gently pulling at the same time. I'm gonna sew a couple stitches first and then kind of get oriented. All right, so we're ready to go. And I kind of gently pull this, and then like I said, I'm smoothing and keeping this fabric kind of taut. You don't really want a lip of fabric kind of rounding over the edge here. You want it to be nice and smooth. All right, so let's do it. I'm stitching up, you know, trying to maintain a nice even distance to this edge of here, the seam. You may get a little bit wobbly. Trust me, no one will notice, so just keep going. All right, so yeah, I'm keeping it a little bit stretched. It's gonna stretch when you're wearing it, so you might as well stretch it now, so then that way it's very, very stretchy. All right, and at the end for my cover stitch, I do 1 stitch forward, and then I go back with my hand wheel, and then I pull it out, and it shouldn't come undone. Just like that. There we go. And that's what it looks like on the other side. All right, and if you need to know how to do this seam here to get it kind of in the round so you have a nice continuous hole, that's up next. Okay, so you've already gotten your picot edge to the leg hole of a pair of underwear or something that you eventually need to put into a circle, a continuous edge here. So here we have our leg opening here. I've already got my picot edge there and it's cover stitched on. So the next step is to do the side seam. Now, if you need to know how to sew a pair of underwear, I have a specific video on that and you can look at that. This is really just focusing on the technique of sewing something in the round and how you're going to finish it using a serger or a cover stitch machine. So, or really the video is focused on sergers and cover stitches. So we're gonna use our serger for this right here. And you can see on this one, I have a fabric waistband, which is kind of my preferred. So I have this edge here. Make sure that you have all these edges flush and get rid of some of these threads here. And really the trick with this is, this isn't too hard, but if your machine doesn't really like going over thicknesses, especially with these little narrow fiddly bits here, this is where you might struggle a little bit. What you can do to help yourself is take this to your straight stitch machine and just sew it right here, just a tiny bit, just inside the elastic. You don't have to go all the way, just a little bit here, maybe even a little bit there, get your seams lined up. And then that way you don't have to really fiddle with that so much. I do that all the time. So there's no shame in it at all. It's whatever you want to do. So I'm going to do it without, just so you can kind of see what happens when you don't. And let's hope for the best. Let's see if I can keep my picot edge all lined up here. Because what you're looking for is a nice smooth transition, right? You want your lace to kind of line up. Your seam may not line up. You just never know where you sewed it from the left side to the right side, but that's okay. We're learning, right? All right, so we're going to sew this on our serger. You're going to need the serger with the seam. All right, and I'm going to trim just a little bit off, and my machine's probably going to kind of push the elastic towards me when it gets to this seam here, and I'm going to lift up the presser foot and let it relax again and kind of get it back on track. So I'm just kind of getting going here. And then I'm going to lift up my presser foot, just make sure everything's still staying lined up and it's relaxed. And so now I'm worried about this top edge here. Press my seam allowance toward the underwear, towards the bottom, and we'll try and keep this edge nice and lined up. It wants to push up. It's just so thick right there. Now I can see that little edge right there wanting to pull, so I'm going to take my awl, kind of line it up a little bit here, a little bit more. There we go. All right, so you need a tail at the beginning and the end, just like that. And then we're going to tidy this up and make it a lot more flush and low profile. So let's trim these edges, or trim these threads here. I'm going to give it a little pull and then trim these threads here. All right. And so now we're going to go to our straight stitch machine. Let's see how I did here. Did pretty good. We're going to go to our straight stitch machine. We're going to secure these threads and make the seam flatter. Okay, so now we have our seam here and we're just going to make it flatter. So the first thing you're going to do is take these thread tails and you're going to fold them to the inside and we're going to tack them to the seam allowance, all right? So I'm going to pull pretty hard. Remember, this is the seam allowance. Even this little piece of lace that I'm turning up a little bit there is in the seam allowance, so it shouldn't show to the outside anyway. So pull kind of firm and push that tail into the seam allowance, and we're just going to stitch it there. This isn't going to show on the outside. We're just kind of securing that. So, and get rid of this excess here, and we can do the same at the top. Pull it down. Now, see, this one isn't very lined up very perfectly, so in some ways I can kind of cheat with this and kind of pull it down a little bit. And I like to use my awl sometimes to kind of get it in there. And secure it. All right. Trim all those little threads. All right, and now we're going to do the part that kind of mashes it down. I guess I over-rotated a little bit there. So find the front and the back of your garment, and we're going to press that seam allowance towards the back of the garment. So here's my leg. There's my seam allowance. Oh, let's trim these threads right here. And we're going to press this towards the back, all right? And we're going to stitch this just up to the cover stitch second needle there. And we're going to mash it down. Now, I like to stitch from the right side of the garment because I find that in most cases, most machines look better on the top side of the stitching rather than the underside. If you feel a little more confident going from the inside, go for it, that's fine. You might also find holding the tail of your thread kind of makes it behave a little bit and less of the thread kind of gets sucked into that back stitch. All right, so I press my seam allowance towards the back there. And I'm just gonna sew, like I said, right up to the other cover stitch. So I'm going to lift up my presser foot and kind of walk it a little bit. Sometimes the elastic or the thickness will get stuck on your feed dogs. And then here we go. Let's see how it looks here. Trim those threads really nice and close. Trim these back stitches, threads nice and close. And look at how much lower profile that is. This is definitely how they do it in stores often, and it looks more professional. All right, and we can do it at the waistband too, but we're mostly worried about this picot edge here. So look, my elastic doesn't really line up there. That happens, you know. If I'm thinking about it when I start, I do a little bit better job. So there you go. Now you have a leg hole in the round. Good job. If you like this video, please let me know and let me know how your elastic sewing goes. I have lots of videos coming in sewing with knits, especially with you're using your cover stitch and your serger out there, and special seam finishes and hem finishes. So thanks for letting me know, and thanks for watching. Bye.